Thank you, Lance. Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here to share some of our experience of using Knowledge Graph in Standard Chartered Bank. Hi, everybody. You might have got my introduction. I'm Hemanth Prabakaran. I head the data analytics and insights in Standard Chartered Bank within group operations. So we have exciting things happening within our Standard Chartered Bank in terms of analytics. Some of the great stories is what I'm going to share today. So the topic which I'm going to cover today is like how do we use insight-driven intelligence with the help of the knowledge graph is really interesting area to look into. So, so before I jump into that, let me explain what are the challenges we face as a global bank, right? Standard Chartered is very old, and also it's one of the huge bank um, in across any geography. So we have 85,000 employees working in the bank, and we have a presence in 40 plus markets, and we have 1,200 branches. And in fact, if you see the operations which is supporting the entire bank have 25,000 people sitting in various countries and also in group locations. And we are supporting five different lines of banking from a retail banking, corporate, institutional, private, wealth, and also commercial banking. So, like I mentioned, I support analytics for group operations. Some of the key strategic uh, objectives, what we would like to always deliver for our clients and also for the organization is how do we drive our uh, uh, our four corners of operations with more intelligence. So let me explain what are the four corners of our operations. One is cyber security in terms of protecting bank assets from external and internal threats. And the second one is like a client experience. So we have a huge number of client base across 40 plus markets. It's quite diversified. And I think client centric is quite important. So basically, from operation perspective, we have a huge mandate to support our client needs at the right time. And of course, for any organization, resilience is quite important, and we are not exception. So resilience is particularly during the period of pandemic, we have been tested to the extent how resilient we as a bank operate to support our clients. Of course, we need to make sure all critical operation continue irrespective of whatever the events occur across the world. So we need to be absolutely resilient all the time. And of course, the last but not least is basically we as a huge financial institution have a mandate to maintain, to keep the trust with our clients, to build the trust for our client base. So it's always quite important to make sure their money and their data is highly secured within our environment. So that's the trust which we need to provide, not only the trust in terms of data and money, but also the services. So protecting privacy and also our client assets is, is absolutely important in our agenda. So maintaining all these four corners in the heart of operations is not that easy actually, because we need to be always 10 steps ahead before any incident happens. So that's why we as a bank put data in the heart of our operations. So we do have a central data lake where we stream data from various applications within the bank. We stream client data and as ITSS data, and also the client interactions from various channels, and also the transaction from various payment touch points, and also all our third party data. Plus also, as a bank, we are very process centric, so there are a lot of metrics around it, and we also source the process metrics. And of course, in order to handle threats, so we source a lot of security data and also application logs. So there is a huge data from a various data landscape or application landscape being sourced or streamed into our central data lake, and we help to produce more client analytics to understand 360 degree of our client and their needs, and also like the client experience, how clients feel about our support and what they need and what are the key support they expect from the bank. And so that's these are all something which we have been able to support, and of course we as a bank, right, been regulated, and we need to prevent any financial crime, and we need to be absolutely compliant to various regulations in various countries. So we also leverage data to do that. And of course, like I mentioned, one of our key objective is like cyber security. So basically we use plenty of data to assess, to perform cyber defense, and also we run a lot of threat intelligence to prevent the bank from quite a lot of threat actors, externally and internally. And of course, from a resilience perspective, we need to continuously monitor the business operations, and make sure that we completely recover from any failure points as soon as possible, to provide a continuous client experience and support. And also we have a huge obligation to manage and compliance to the privacy of our client data. So I think it's quite a lot of things we need to do, and we do that with the help of data. So some of the key challenge in doing that is basically the traditional technologies which historically exists within the bank, and we have been using what were useful in order to provide more MI reporting analytics, but it is not helping with the context. Actually, there are plenty of hidden insights in the interconnectedness of the data which you are unable to use actually, right? So we realize that those are all our key challenges. I think some of them are lack of interconnectedness, right? So data itself is not doesn't make any sense if it is not connected. So I think the traditional technologies doesn't support interconnectedness. And then context, right? So there are plenty of siloed analysis being done, but the context is missing. So that's also another bigger challenge. And explainability. So we as a financial institution do anything always needs to make sure that it's easily explainable to our regulators. So that was one of the area which is a huge challenge. And also the interlinkages, right? So like I mentioned, bank is quite diversified and it is huge. So I think maintaining interlinkages at the enterprise level is a key challenge as well. So how did we overcome these challenges? So that's one of the reason we took an advantage of some of the emerging technologies like graph technology. I think that's exactly how we built a tool called as a Cypher, which is a graph-powered insight engine within the bank. So Cypher is not the language what we use in Neo4j. I don't mean that, but of course we adopted the power of Cypher, and we turned them into end user capability, and we built an insight engine which is called as Cypher, SE Cypher. So what is Cypher? Cypher is a no-code knowledge graph based insight engine. So, and it absolutely empowers the business with the graph analytics, and it's highly scalable and highly plug and play to generate insights and actions from our bank's data. So traditionally we moved from stitching the data with the relational databases to enterprise knowledge graph. So we stream all the data from our data lake into knowledge graph, and that was being built on top of the Neo4j database. And then on top of that, we created an insight engine, a tool for our end users, so that they can plug and play and build quite a lot of perspectives, and do semantic search, and generate insights which they can apply more relevant to support their operations. So that's pretty much is called as Cypher. Cypher. So Cypher is absolutely a knowledge graph based insight engine, and we also put together multiple tools within our ecosystem to do a data orchestration for the knowledge graph. And like I mentioned, it's completely self-service. The end user, it's an end user capability which allow the business users to perform a semantic search and do a focal point analysis and generate insights for the relevant operations with no code and also with graph analytics completely being empowered across the capability. And of course there are plenty of features which has been enabled in this capability, like it can provide insights and it can be highly configured by users by themselves, and users can also mimic a lot of their actions and save them as a user defined actions, and they can do a lot of graph exploration and of course it comes with a role based access control as well, and it supports open architecture and it can also ingest or embed insights in the bank application ecosystem as well. So so if you take a look, how do we, what is the life cycle, how we are creating our knowledge graph, and how we have embedded a Cypher as a end user capability. So we stream data from either our bank's data lake, COO is operations data lake, and we also connect to a semantic graph of any of the BI tools within our bank. And also, in order to consume stream data directly from the application ecosystem, we also tap onto the REST APIs of applications. So we stream data from 3 different channels, and we stream into graph database Neo4j. So, but how do we help with the orchestration? Is like we use a tool called Data IQ, through which we completely do the data preparation in order to produce a final knowledge graph in Neo4j. And once a graph has been created in Neo4j, anyone from the user community using Cypher, they can tap onto that enterprise knowledge graph, and they can build their own perspectives, and they can start to build their insights and actions, and they can deliver tangible outcomes to their business and functions. So that's exactly what the Cypher does. So how do we accelerate the graph analytics for our business within Standard Chartered? So this is how Cypher looks like. So it's not only one use case. So like I mentioned, we are constructing an enterprise knowledge graph more progressively. So as and when we build the knowledge graph progressively, the graph is available to Cypher. Now the users can set up their own modules, or they can build their own perspectives within Cypher using self-service capabilities. There are plenty of use cases we already started to build, and it's and the way our business use Cypher is absolutely self-service, which means like they can onboard a new perspective in any area, and they can tap onto the knowledge graph, enterprise knowledge graph, and they can choose what part of the knowledge graph is really they need to get on board to build their perspectives, and then they can absolutely define what has to be in semantic search and what has to be in insights, and they can build their own module within Cypher. The moment they build, then basically they can roll out to their end user to support various graph analytics operations. So yeah, so the quick the use cases which we have already built within Cypher are basically operational continuity and in resolution, which is basically the complete service catalog of the bank, codified operating model of the bank, which means like if there is a process being supported in one of our market, let's say like it is Malaysia Standard Chartered, and let's say the best example is like Hong Kong printing notes, like which is one of the service we provide. and what are all the dependencies in order to support that particular service that can be easily identified with the help of Cypher using OCIR as a module or perspective. And we also do a lot of third-party security assessment. So third-party been involved in quite a lot of our engage operation engagements. So basically, what is the various threat? What are the various impact and the dependencies they create within our ecosystem can be easily identified with the help of another module. There are plenty of use cases which we have currently built, and our users across the various units within the bank started to use Cypher. So how Cypher looks like. So this is so once they click a particular module, basically what they can see is like they have a very intuitive user interface through which they can be able to perform a semantic search, and they can explore the graph, and they can also select particular node, and they can perform further perspectives, or maybe perform certain actions in order to identify more useful insights from the graph, right? So if you see Cypher, we have the we what the use cases which we have currently enabled, or the control library. This is cyber security control library. The bank has very a very broad cybersecurity policy which has been established as part of our ERM framework, and it has about 900 controls. And some of the key challenges, like which controls apply to which particular key control domains, and also what particular infrastructure, and what is the effectiveness of those particular controls, and maturity of those controls. So this needs to be measured as an insight, right? So basically what we have done is, so we have streamed all the bank IT assets and the relevant controls applicable, and then we enable a semantic search for our head of ICS for various business function, for them to perform a semantic search from a control perspective or a domain perspective, and also from various country perspective, or maybe even from a product perspective, to see so what are all the controls being applied in that relevant area, and how mature they are, and what are the gaps. So that is something that they can be easily able to do it in few steps using Cypher. And we have also used Cypher for other areas of cybersecurity as well. For example, cyber risk prevention or risk identification. So one of the good example I can say is like insider threat. So the bank has a very strict policy when it comes to accessing the critical information assets of what been identified in the bank. So basically, if anyone requesting access to any of the possible or potential failure points, for example, like external email access, right? And also USB access in company's laptop. Potentially, these are all the touch points. Potentially, there could be data leakage could happen. So it is quite important for the risk owners or risk managers to understand the context, how far this risk could be elevated. So before they approve any such kind of approvals, they completely assess so what kind of potential threats it could lead to. So they would identify potential threats, and they might even prevent risk by avoiding any approval for such kind of request, right? And operational continuity and resolution, of course, this is basically, like I mentioned, it's this entire bank's operating model being codified in terms of service catalog. So basically, in the event of resolution, we would know what are all the dependencies for any particular entity. So if you are resolving, the bank is heading to a resolution, particularly in terms of any entity in a particular market, they need to assess what are all the dependencies in terms of staff, in terms of vendor, third party, and in terms of in terms of various applications, right, for their critical economic function, which they provide in that particular market. So it is quite important to identify those codified dependencies. So using Cypher, people can be able to quickly assess that. And of course, there are other more areas like vulnerability assessment. The moment Google is publishing a CVE exposure and also a patch for Google Chrome, then we quickly able to connect that and assess what's the impact within our bank ecosystem, and what are all the areas or what are all the assets which needs to be immediated, and what are the potential impact to the business and function that can be quickly pivoted with the help of Cypher. And of course, we also apply Cypher for the other areas like identity access management and data privacy and risk and controls as well. So there are plenty of use case. So if you carefully see, what we have been doing is like we build that sophisticated knowledge graph, and we are building it more progressively. So currently, all the relevant data been streamed there, and it is absolutely been stitched. The graph is very powerful, and it is available. But in order to consume in a better way, we build this tool called a Cypher, and we completely mimics all the, and we want it to be completely no code. So we mimic a lot of user expected actions in terms of features in this tool, so that they can do a semantic search, they can produce insights rapidly, and they can build perspectives by taking a part of a knowledge graph, and they can provide that insights to support their operations at any point of time. So that, like I mentioned, the challenges which I highlighted in my first slide, like how we can be more vigilant to support cybersecurity operations, how we can be resilient during the time of pandemic, how we can also create more trust, making sure that the privacy components been identified and it has been protected, and also how we can uplift our client experience to support our client operations. So 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 not only Cypher is acting as a tool where end user come and do a semantic search and do a graph analysis and generate insights, but also they can ingest these insights into the application ecosystem of the bank. For example, I think if you see from a user experience perspective, the internal bank user perspective, if they how they can use Cypher, how Cypher can add value to them without they are getting into the Cypher, right? So that's basically, we enabled a feature to ingest intelligent insights in any bank's application. I can give you an example. There is an application within the bank which is called as ICS risk remediation. So what so basically, any cybersecurity relevant dispensation request will be raised in this particular tool. So basically, across the bank, even including me, anyone needs a dispensation to use the USB access, because given we are a financial institution, we have very strict guidelines, and by default, all our laptops do not have a USB access, right? But some of their roles still require USB access to support some of the client operation or the business needs, actually. So, but they can go through the dispensation request. Basically, when they go and raise this dispensation request, previously the dispensation request will get submitted to the risk managers, and the risk managers within that particular business function receive that dispensation request to enable USB access on their personal laptop, and they will review. They will see what is the justification for this particular request, right? But beyond that justification, they do not have any more context. So purely the request being only approved based on the justification, right? Or maybe some offline investigation. So this is how it used to be before. but now using Cypher, how we are handling this, because one of the challenges, like these dispensation requests, it can potentially can end up in risk as well. For example, allowing the bank employee to access a USB, but at the same time, if he has access, if he have access to critical information asset, right? Any of the critical information asset, like for example, Swift payment clearing instructions. If he has access to some of those things, there is high potential that this can lead to a data breach, because by using USB access, they can push those instructions into, they can copy, and it can potentially can create a huge impact to the bank. Of course, this kind of context was not visible to the risk managers previously, but now what we are doing is, like within the application, so we embedded an API. So that API, based on the dispensation request, who is the requester. For example, if I am raising the request, it is a dispensation request for me. Based on my employee ID, the API will perform a search in the enterprise knowledge graph, and it will identify, is there any critical information access this particular person, I mean, is been exposed to, which means, like, if I have access to any of the critical information as such, which has a high confidentiality, then that would be clearly visible as part of this request itself. So basically, what happening is, like, now the risk managers, when they open up this dispensation request, they can see that okay, so the request details everything, but on the right hand side, they can also see, I think there is a high risk being indicated by the intelligent insight API through Cypher. And then they will be quite aware now, okay, so this is something very high, so I cannot be able to approve straight away, so let's see why it is high risk. They will click and they will explore in Cypher. Then what happens is, like, they can clearly see why this is a high risk. For example, the person, maybe of course, the name of the person being encrypted for a confidentiality purpose, right? And he is based in a country, Bangladesh, and maybe he has access to 5 different systems, which is highlighted in the yellow color, I mean, systems and sense applications, and he has already have external email access. And of course, now provisioning him the USB access, uh, right? So, and provisioning him the USB access, can see what kind of potential risk it can lead to. For example, if you see one of the system called Cape, which is hosting some of the information as such, which is highlighted in the purple color, right? For example, client risk assessments are being stored there, client assets and liabilities being stored there, and also authentication keys for payment and clearing instructions are also stored in that particular application. So now this person, who is already a privileged user of that particular application, is requesting a USB access. So which means, like, the risk owner completely see the context. Approving such a request, it's highly possible can lead to a potential breach of data breach of exposing our confidential information. So they might take a step back and prevent any risk even before it happens. So potentially they might go deep dive into further details and see how it can be prevented with a mitigation, or maybe more remediation steps. So this is one example. So currently, within the bank, we are embedding such intelligent insights to various applications. This is one example, right? And so now, so far, the applications uh, uh, been functioning more from a siloed perspective, right? And now they're all more connected with the intelligent insights from Cypher. So that's how the context been added and to the various application within the bank, right? So this is something was really powerful, and it has really, it has tremendously brought quite a lot of business benefits for the bank as well. So There are plenty. I can share the story, but I'd like to quantify what are all the tangible business benefits we were able to reap with the help of the graph so far, right? So particularly in the cybersecurity area, we accelerated the knowledge graph, and it has really reaped quite a lot of benefits in terms of more security threats we are able to identify even before the impact happens, actually. Like I mentioned, so we have a graph now, huge graph, and anything in any other application, even before for example, from identifying vulnerability exposure, right? What could be the potential impact, and how the threat looks like, and what could be the potential impact this threat could lead to, right? We are able to identify the way ahead, and also faster resolution of security threats, right? So because of uh, the because of a lot of time the analysts spend in doing analysis with the help of various data, there was a tremendous amount of time which has been spent in the resolution of security threats. Now with the help of Cypher, we are ingesting even intelligence into various touch points where these cyber analysts do their assessment. So they get the intelligence and insights on their fingertips using Cypher. They're able to solve more cases, and they are able to resolve more security threats with the help of Cypher. So this is another huge benefit, and also potential breaches. The previous example, what I mentioned, right? Some of the potential breaches, right? Not only in our bank, right? Across the world, there are quite a lot of data breaches being reported, right? And what is the lesson we learn from there is basically, I think it's because the context was not being applied. I think contextual intelligence could help to prevent potential breaches. So that's one of the reasons that we built enterprise-wide knowledge graph with the help of Cypher, and then ingesting that into the application landscape, so that we can proactively scan any of the breach it could lead to, actually, right? So any of our actions, any of the user actions, any of the user I mean, like touch points or their actions could lead to potential breaches. That is something which has been evaluated way ahead, way ahead than before the breach could happen. And and of course, the internal threats also being identified and managed. Like I mentioned, it's not only our client data, it's not only our IT assets data, but also our own employee data, right? And for example, even we assess a mandatory training for the bank employees. How does it contribute to a threat, and how it can impact our business operations? So these are also being analyzed, and not only that, even the internal investigations, we are using a knowledge graph, right, to support. So of course, the internal threats being identified and also being managed more smartly than before. And of course, the critical assets, right? Uh, uh, we moved from a reactive approach to very proactive approach, which means like our incident management uh, landscape has completely been changed, because what we have done is like we enabled more monitoring with the help of knowledge graph, particularly our crown jewels, right? So what are all the crown jewel assets within the bank, and how we can make it more cyber safe and cyber resilient? So this is something which we have able to achieve, and progressively we are achieving with the help of a knowledge graph. And of course, there are plenty of manpower being spent in order to make sure that we are compliant in terms of security, because this has been expected by our regulators as well. Also, knowledge graph is able to help us to make sure that we are also compliance to various regulations across various geographies as well, right? So these are all some of the tangible business benefits we reaped already. There are plenty of them. We are going to do it as we move forward. Of course, there are secondary benefits which I would like to call out also. For example, the data discovery became very, very simple. I think there are plenty of data discovery tools available in the market, but I think using a graph-based data discovery is absolutely, I think, quite intelligent, and it provides a lot more context. So that is a huge benefit. And persona based recommendations, right? So now what we are slowly we are expanding our knowledge graph with our data from client channels and client experience touch points, so that we are trying to build a persona to provide a more better recommendations for our clients as well, and also improved access to information. Like I mentioned, we want to be absolutely vigilant, right? Who access what information, right? But not reactively but proactively. So in order to do that, we completely use a knowledge graph. So any access management also can potentially assess this access could whether any toxic access been involved in this particular access request, that can be identified at the very early stage, and we could prevent any kind of risk, right? And there are plenty of other things, like I mentioned: contextualized search, automated insights, and exploratory and path investigation. So knowledge graph is highly useful, and it reaped immense benefits for us in various areas already, like cyber security and resilience. And we have a great plans to take it ahead within the bank, and to use it in more broader areas as well, actually, right? So yeah, so that's coming to the end of my session. I hope it is quite useful, our experience, and there are much more to share, but I think but I'm looking forward to share more in the future sessions. But thank you very much for attending the session today. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Great, thank you so much. I just love that one slide you had, the cyber risk prevention use case, where you can just, I think you said all you had to do was put in the employee ID number, and all of a sudden you have this complete visual of all of the access points they might have. It's so valuable to have that. It's very cool stuff.
Thank you.
But I wanted to remind the audience that if they want to submit questions, they can do so by typing them into the questions tab. And we have had a couple that have come in along the way as you were presenting. So I wanted to get started with those. So there's one here that asks, what has been the biggest challenge that you've overcome as you've implemented these applications?
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the biggest challenge while doing this implementation, what we faced is like, I think, how do we embed our client journey um, in this ontology design of enterprise knowledge graph? Because it is quite important. We need to make sure it reflects our business, I think, operations, the way how the journey flows, and what are all the various touch points, and how they are all interconnected to each other, right? I think embedding, I think understanding that, and also designing and embedding that into the broader knowledge graph is a quite key challenge. And also, right, like I mentioned, enterprise knowledge graph is not going to be a big bang, one huge graph on day one itself. So it has to be really thought through from the day one, but it has to be made progressively, right? So that's where so there are quite a lot of challenges where to start, but we made it very, very clear. I think we are going to build the graph as we solve various challenges, various use cases, and it has to be progressive. But at the same time, some of the common reference data and some of the common business operations needs to be identified and it is to be part of the graph, so that it would eventually help to be a touch point to solve the other use cases as well, right? So I think designing an enterprise knowledge graph needs a lot of principles need to be set ahead. That is something we did a lot of thought through. I think if you see the entire journey, what we achieved in Cypher, the biggest chunk of time is being spent more on that particular part. I think building a tool and what are the features. These are all, of course, we have a user experience. I think I have a more than a decade of a user experience. in this area. So basically, I transform them into features which is more intuitive for our end users as well. So that's something is what we learned during this journey.
Great, thank you. And kind of going along with that, there's someone that's saying that they're new to knowledge graphs. How did you get started on knowledge graphs and then expand it for so many use cases?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. Uh, yeah, so I think there is always myth, right? I mean, like a lot of confusion on the knowledge graph, how it is going to be useful, right? Everyone is excited about knowledge graphs because it provides a lot of context. But how they are going to build one, how they are going to make it more useful, right? So my sincere advice in that area, you need to clearly understand what you are building the knowledge graph for, and what kind of problem it is going to solve, right? For example, I think uh, there are powerful graph technology exist in the market. I think Neo4j is one of them, one of the top graph technology which does exist, right? I think simply pushing your data into the graph technology or graph databases is not going to help you, right? So you need to really come up with a, business model which you need to embed as a design into this knowledge graph to solve your business objective. So, for example, if you see my presentation, I started with cybersecurity, I started with resilience, I started with trust, and I also mentioned the client experience. Those are my objectives. Those are all the objectives which is relevant in my area. In order to solve the challenges, emerging challenges from those area, I think context is quite important. I think a connected data is quite important. So that's how we ended up in choosing a knowledge graph. And we certainly called the knowledge graph is going to solve these are all the problems, and these are all the potential use cases, and this is exactly the roadmap or plan looks like, and this is how we progressively will build and solve use case by use case. Same time, I think you cannot afford any kind of fragmented graphs in your knowledge graph, right? It has to be highly connected, it has to be highly contextualized, and I think on top of all these things, you need to really visualize what kind of intelligent insights you want to get out of this knowledge graph, and how where can apply this, and how can you take actions. For example, I think the use case which I have gone through, preventing a cyber risk, that's a very simple use case, right? But it is purposeful, right? It's highly purposeful. So today, the risk managers are having a huge visibility on what are all the potential risk these their actions can lead to. So they are very mindful before approving any kind of request, and they are doing the responsibility to prevent risk even before it happens, right? So I think it's quite important to make sure um, that what is the purpose of your knowledge graph, and how you can leverage and apply it, and take and also create more action and insights out of it. So that is something you need to have a clear visibility before you start to use knowledge graph.
Great, thank you for that explanation. And it looks like we are getting a little tight on time. So I wanted to remind the audience that if your question wasn't asked, someone from Neo4j will reach out to you directly, or you can also send an email to webinar@neo4j.com, and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. Hemanth, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate your insights, as I'm sure our audience members do as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's likewise. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our success story in this forum. I think it's really a great opportunity, and I am looking forward to share more of such stories. Maybe in the future, I would like to share how we are expanding the knowledge graphs within a bank to solve more offensive use cases. At the moment, you have seen how we are using defensively to protect the bank and support operations. But I would like to share more stories on offense, how we are going to solve more offensive challenges. For example, personalized recommendations, and also to create more. I think to create more, how it can be more impactful in our client on a day-to-day life. That is something we are already kickstarted to work upon. So I'm looking forward to share more stories in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, we would love to have you share those stories as well. So we'll talk after this and try to get something on the calendar.
Great. Thank you.
All right. For those in our audience, the next session will be starting in just a few minutes. So stay tuned. Thanks so much.